start here because what's been fascinating over the past week is, and the Republicans are quite good at this, creating this notion that somehow a vote against Kavanaugh was going to be detrimental to their electoral chances. Now, Susan Collins had to make a decision. And I'm not convinced that John McCain passing away didn't greatly change the calculation for someone like Lindsey Graham and for Susan Collins. Like, I don't think it was a coincidence that Graham had his sort of showboating moment where he
2020 primary.
Well, I think it's a 2020 primary, but I think it's also a question of branding. I think there is an awareness that, like, they can't, there is not the same opportunity to be this type of senator. Like, it doesn't have any value anymore. It doesn't, there is, with John McCain, to the extent that there was any wing of the Republican Party, and I wouldn't even say it's a wing at that point, it was a couple of feathers at the edge of a wing that was pretending to be something that really doesn't exist in the Republican Party anymore. John McCain, when he left, that coalition, lost a significant percentage of the people who were in it, right? Like, I mean, to the extent that there was one, was there 3 people in that? You sort of wing of the, you lost 33% of it. And so Graham went his direction, and I think Collins also made the same assessment, that there is no room. There's no path for me within the Republican Party to maintain even my veneer of moderation. And, we saw her speech, which it seemed like, let her talk for another 10 minutes and she'd be talking about Pizzagate. But the conventional wisdom was that the Kavanaugh nomination had energized Republicans, and it may have. And there were early reports that the Democrats were worried what would happen if Kavanaugh was not confirmed. And the Republicans, they were worried if they didn't pass Kavanaugh that it would hurt them. Well, new polling out now shows that 46% of voters said the Senate made the wrong decision in approving of the Kavanaugh. 40% said it was the right to elevate him to the high court. Now, this is a national poll. So, in some respects, it doesn't matter because there's no national election.
Yeah, it's a good thing they don't decide things by the popular vote.
Well, the thing is that we only have state elections, right? I mean, there's no national election in the off year. So really it's more important what any specific state says or what any specific congressional district says. But this gives you a broad sense of what's going on.
But for general Democratic purposes, it's not looking good.
What's not looking good in terms of...
Just one more example of why the Supreme Court is not in any way a democratic institution, right?
Well, of course it's not a democratic institution. In fact, half the members now, or at least, is it half the members or 1/3 of the members, 4 people, I guess, have been appointed by presidents who did not win the popular vote. I mean, aside from not being democratic in the sense that nobody elects them, we have a Senate which 51% of the Senate is controlled by something like 18% of the population of the United States. Yeah, it is. Senate's also not particularly democratic either.
It's like
that was
anti-democratic to the power of anti-democratic.
Right. And it was set up that way. I mean, it wasn't until the 17th Amendment that we had even direct elections for the Senate. So 3 out of 4 Democrats say they're very motivated to turn out and vote in the midterms. 68% of the Republicans say they're very motivated. That's a substantial difference. And there's no reason to believe that a month from now, Democrats are going to be any less motivated. There's reason to believe that Republicans could be less motivated simply because they get further away from their success here.
The Democrats in North Dakota are really trying to hit Heidi Heitkamp with when she filmed her ad saying that she wasn't going to support Kavanaugh. Like, did she do it before or after the investigation? That's how they're trying to keep the issue alive. It's very desperate.
The You mean the
Republicans are trying
right.
Yeah, sorry.
And now the problem is that some of those red states, some of those red states, there's just more Republicans there, and they're more energized. There is some evidence that Heidi Heitkamp helped herself, and where folks like Kristen Sinema and Phil Bredesen hurt themselves by saying that were they in the Senate, they would have voted to confirm Kavanaugh. Manchin, it's hard to know, but I would imagine.
Can't touch me.
Yeah.
Go screw yourself.
Yeah. I mean, Manchin won his primary fairly handily. I think
She got about 30% of the vote. So, and in the state that Bernie won, there probably is some appetite to the more in some areas that are to the left of him. But he actually, if you watch him, he does a pretty good job of pretending that he cares about that stuff too.
Yes.
There's
Bob
a reason
Kincaid,
he's so popular.
I think I spoke to Bob Kincaid from Head On at Netroots Nation, and he made a point of saying, you can't trust Manchin because he will just sell you out in a heartbeat. And I think that's the case. Again, though, I think that if Susan Collins votes against Kavanaugh, Manchin does too. This was sort of a free vote for him at that point. But I think, and he may have made the right calculation in terms of not being abandoned by his, or to the extent that he makes it up in independence.
Yeah. Democrats are much more forgiving than Republicans when you vote the way they don't want you to, right?
I think yes, to a certain extent. I mean, I don't know. It depends on what state you're in. But independent voters, far less supportive of the decision to confirm Kavanaugh. 47% say the Senate erred. 34% said it made the right decision. 36% of voters said it would make them less likely. I mean, I don't see necessarily the evidence of they may be less forgiving in terms of primaries, but they tend to come out during the general elections.
The Democrats?
No, the Republicans. I mean, I don't know I think the problem is that in the context of primaries is where you get Republicans are disciplined. And we have yet on the left to match that level of intensity.
Oh, yeah, because they're sociopathic. Like, do you think the Tea Party cared if they were hurting Republicans' chances in general elections?
Yes.
No, they were on a kamikaze mission and they succeeded.
I think they do care, though.
Like,
I mean, they made some miscalculations in specific primaries, but then conversely, there's much more willingness for them to subordinate themselves to things like the court, as an example. And they've not let the perfect be the enemy of the good from their perspective.
Well, not in a primary. In the primaries,
no,
I mean,
the primary. That was in
examples.
2010. They made bad calculations.
Yeah, like
for
you
sure.
don't
but
have
they still swept.
People like the guy who called in, like, you shouldn't run against a left candidate against Democrats in primaries because it'll hurt them in the general. They did not think about that.
No, the only problem that the Republicans had when they won with someone who's maybe like not a witch, or with Aiken. I mean, but I don't know that they didn't care about the chances in the general election as much as I think there is a disconnect from reality with some of those people, where there's a presumption that far more people agree with them than don't in those instances.
Well, it worked out very well for them. No?
I am all for the strategy of primarying, yes, and winning. The problem is that they're at up to this point is that there's not enough people. Like I'm totally in favor of primarying someone like Manchin or Andrew Cuomo or Joe Lieberman. I mean, across the board. The problem is only insofar as like you don't win. I mean, I think the strategy of primarying and disciplining their politicians in that way has been a very effective one for the right, without a doubt. 36% of voters say it would make them less likely, 31% would be more likely to vote for a Kavanaugh supporting Senate candidate. So, not a huge difference there. And of course, again, this is national. So in a red state, very different numbers. But while that may help Heidi Heitkamp in the end of the day in North Dakota, there's also a plan B for Republicans in North Dakota. The Supreme Court, I guess as of yesterday, Kavanaugh had not quite been seated or participated in a 4-4 split decision. And when it's a 4-4 split decision at the Supreme Court, if it is deciding a case that has been, which it would have, come from a circuit court of appeals, the ruling of the circuit court, the appellate court, stands. And this is a case that came out of North Dakota. North Dakota in 2017, following Heidi Heitkamp's win in 2012, she won by less than 3,000 votes in North Dakota. 750,000 people in that state. I don't know how many are eligible voters. Matt, any guess? Yeah. I mean, obviously a fraction of 750. But 3,000 still represents a pretty incredibly small number of people. There's probably somewhere around 15,000 eligible Native American voters in North Dakota. The vast majority voted for Heidi Heitkamp. In 2017, a voter law ID was challenged by Native residents. In April of this year, a federal district court judge blocked large portions of the law as discriminatory against Native voters. Why? Because the law, as first introduced by the governor, in North Dakota, there is no registration. You just show up to vote and you got to show an ID. So that's not necessarily an unreasonable thing. However, the North Dakota law said that you needed to have a street address on your driver's license. Now, you can get driver's licenses with P.O. boxes, addresses. In rural areas, when I lived upstate, we did not have a street address. We did not get mail delivery there because it was a rural area. You got to go to the post office and get it at the P.O. box. Well, apparently, on rural Indian communities, the Postal Service does not provide residential delivery. So tribal IDs, which are okay to vote with, use P.O. boxes, which under North Dakota law is not sufficient. So the IDs that they have are okay. It's just that the addresses they have are invalid. Yet they don't have residential addresses in terms of postal service. So a federal judge blocked a big part of that law because it's discriminatory against Native Americans who live in North Dakota who almost as a rule do not have a residential address. The Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, however, allowed the law to go into effect. So during the primary, the law was not in the IDs that had P.O. boxes were okay. Then the Eighth Circuit subsequently allowed the law to go into effect. The Supreme Court, in splitting 4-4, upheld that ruling. Try and guess what the 4-4 split was. How could, though, the Eighth Circuit of Appeals look at this and not see that it's discriminatory in nature? There's no argument. First off, there's no argument that somehow a P.O. box makes it more likely that you could have a fraudulent ID. I guess the argument is that, like, well, you could get 3 P.O. boxes, but you can only have one address. I don't know who would do that to vote. They haven't found anybody who did that. But let's go over who what the composition of the Eighth Circuit Court is, just to give you a sense of why this stuff is relevant. There are 11 active and 6 senior judges. Levansky Smith, he's the chief judge. He was appointed by George W. Bush. Roger Leland Woolman, he was appointed by Ronald Reagan. James Loken was appointed by George Herbert Walker Bush. Steve Colloton was appointed by George W. Bush. Raymond Grunder was appointed by George W. Bush. William Dwayne Benton was appointed by George W. Bush. Bobby Shepard was appointed by George W. Bush. Ralph Erickson was appointed by Trump. Stephen Grass was appointed by Trump. David Strass was appointed by Trump. And Jane Kelly, that's weird, she's the only woman on the entire court, was appointed by Barack Obama. And then, of course, there's 6 senior judges, and 2 were appointed by Reagan, and 4 were appointed by either Poppy or Junior Bush. So that's what happens, folks. That's the way this works.
Well, maybe if Hillary Clinton had called for a Green New Deal, then you don't have the fucking problem the circuits.
I've got the map between where Heidi Heitkamp won in 2012. Let's see if we can find the reservations. So here is Fort Berthold. Down here is Standing Rock. Here is Turtle Mountain. This one is Spirit Lake, and then Sisseton down here. And the other thing to notice is this is all the rural areas here. This is farmers, and this is ranchers, basically. And this is the college towns are on this side of the river too.
So there you have it. I mean, any place that is the bluest places are those reservations, and so this is a law that is completely geared. And there's one other group, now that you mention it, of people probably in that state who also don't have residential addresses, but rather have P.O. boxes on their IDs. College students. So this is a law that is completely geared towards making sure that Heidi Heitkamp doesn't win by disenfranchising Native voters and young voters in college. And that's it. End of story. Ball game. Doesn't matter.
Oh, don't forget poor people who might be moving from address to address.
Right.
You know who else could get 3 addresses? Rich people. Maybe they'll address that in the next session.
Unlikely. But the bottom line is, like, this is why structural stuff like this is so important. Because it doesn't matter what Heidi Heitkamp offers in terms of a platform. I mean, I think... I shouldn't say that, but she can offer all sorts of things to folks, but if they can't vote, they can't vote. So that's the situation in North Dakota, and it very well may be that make the difference. I mean, end of story. Hopefully, with a month left, they have made this decision. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I'd be curious if anybody out there who's in that neck of the woods has a sense of what is going to be done. I don't know how you issue 10,000 new IDs with street addresses. I don't know how that happens. But we'll see. We will look into that more and see if there's any other fix for something like that. But that's basically, that dynamic is what we're seeing across the country. It's no different than what we saw in Wisconsin with Milwaukee. Remember, Wisconsin, Clinton lost by 11,000 votes, 10,000 votes. There was far more than 10,000 votes that were suppressed in Wisconsin because of their voter ID law. Michigan, 7,000. As these laws get passed, there's a reason why they're passed. I mean, there's a reason why they do this. We will keep an eye on what's going on in North Dakota.